shot echoed across the rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch for minutes. Somewhere in the maze of destroyed buildings, a German sniper had just claimed another victim, but his moment of satisfaction would be short-lived. Within seconds of pulling the trigger, he was already moving, crawling through debris and broken masonry, because he knew what was coming next. The muzzle flash, the sound's signature, even the trajectory of his bullet had given away crucial information to enemy observers, who were now calculating his position with deadly precision. This was the reality of sniper warfare in World War II, a lethal chess match where every move carried the potential for immediate death. Unlike the infantry soldier who could blend into the anonymity of his squad, the sniper operated in a world where he was simultaneously the hunter and the hunted, marked for elimination by specialized enemy units whose sole purpose was to track down and kill men exactly like him. The development of counter-sniper tactics during World War II represented one of the most sophisticated forms of battlefield hunting ever devised. Both Allied and Axis forces quickly recognized that effective snipers could inflict damage far beyond their individual kill counts. They could paralyze entire sectors, demoralize troops, and eliminate key personnel with surgical precision. This recognition led to the creation of dedicated counter-sniper teams equipped with advanced optics, sound detection equipment, and specialized training that turned the act of hunting snipers into a deadly science. German counter-sniper units, known as Scharfschützenabwehr, employed systematic approaches that would have impressed any detective. They studied muzzle flash patterns, analyzed bullet trajectories, and maintained detailed maps marking probable sniper positions. These teams carried high-powered telescopes, range-finding equipment, and rifles fitted with advanced Zeiss optics that could spot the glint of an enemy scope from over a kilometer away. The psychological impact of knowing such units were actively hunting them weighed heavily on Allied snipers operating in occupied Europe. Soviet counter-sniper operations were equally methodical, but often more brutally direct. The Red Army developed teams of hunters called sniper hunters, who would spend days studying a single suspected sniper position. They employed decoy targets, sometimes tragic dummies dressed in Soviet uniforms, other times actual soldiers ordered to expose themselves briefly to draw fire. Once a German sniper revealed his position by taking the bait, Soviet hunters would converge on the location using predetermined routes that had been carefully planned to avoid exposing themselves to counter fire. The Americans and British developed their own counter-sniper doctrines that emphasized technological solutions alongside tactical innovation. American forces in the Pacific Theater created specialized teams equipped with M1C and M1D sniper rifles fitted with early infrared scopes for night operations. These teams would methodically clear suspected sniper positions using coordinated fire from multiple angles, ensuring that even if the primary target escaped, he would be driven into the sights of supporting marksmen positioned along likely escape routes. The constant threat of counter-sniper operations created a perpetual state of paranoia among snipers that extended far beyond their active hunting periods. Every glint of sunlight off metal, every movement in peripheral vision, every unusual sound could signal the approach of enemy hunters. This hypervigilance took a severe psychological toll, as snipers found themselves unable to relax even during supposedly safe periods behind their own lines. The technical aspects of position detection made every shot a calculated risk that could prove fatal within minutes. When a rifle fired, it created multiple signatures that trained observers could exploit. The muzzle flash, visible even in daylight to observers using proper optics, provided an immediate bearing to the shooter's position. The sound of the shot, while seemingly instantaneous, actually reached different listening posts at slightly different times, allowing triangulation teams to plot the source location with remarkable accuracy. More sophisticated was the analysis of bullet impact patterns. Experienced counter-sniper teams could examine the angle and trajectory of bullets that struck near their positions and work backward to determine probable firing positions. They would then cross-reference this data with terrain analysis, identifying which locations offered the necessary sight lines while providing adequate concealment and escape routes. The dust signature created by muzzle blast in dry conditions proved particularly problematic for snipers operating in North African and Eastern European theaters. Even a small puff of dust kicked up by the rifle's discharge could be spotted by alert observers using binoculars or telescopes. This forced snipers to consider not just their concealment from direct observation, but also the environmental conditions that might betray their presence through secondary effects. The psychological pressure of immediate relocation after every shot created a constant state of physical and mental exhaustion. Unlike other combat roles where soldiers could establish defensive positions and hold them for extended periods, snipers lived in a world of perpetual motion. The moment they pulled the trigger, their current position became compromised, initiating a frantic race against time to reach a new location before enemy forces could coordinate a response. This constant movement required snipers to pre-plan multiple positions along their intended route of operations, studying each location for fields of fire, concealment opportunities, and escape routes. They had to memorize the terrain so thoroughly that they could navigate between positions while crawling, often in complete darkness, without becoming disoriented or trapped in dead-end locations. The physical demands of this constant relocation were enormous. Snipers carried not only their rifles and ammunition, but also camouflage materials, observation equipment, food, and water for extended missions. Moving this equipment quickly and quietly while remaining undetected required exceptional physical conditioning and mental discipline. Many snipers developed chronic back and knee problems from the constant crawling and awkward positions required for both shooting and movement. The mental strain was equally debilitating. Each shot fired represented a decision point where the sniper had to weigh the value of the target against the risk of exposure. A poorly chosen target, or a shot taken from a position without adequate escape routes, could result in being trapped by converging enemy forces. This constant calculation of risk versus reward created a psychological burden that few other combat roles demanded. Enemy forces recognized the devastating impact that successful sniper elimination could have on morale and operational effectiveness. As a result, they dedicated disproportionate resources to hunting down individual snipers, sometimes assigning entire squads or even company-sized units to eliminate a single marksman who had proven particularly effective. The German army's response to Soviet snipers during the Battle of Stalingrad exemplified this approach. When snipers like Vasily Zaitsev began inflicting significant casualties on German forces, entire units were tasked with hunting them down. These operations involved coordinated sweeps using multiple teams approaching from different directions, artillery bombardments of suspected positions, and the deployment of specialized equipment, including sound-ranging devices and advanced optical equipment. The psychological impact of being designated as a priority target extended beyond the immediate physical danger. Snipers knew that their faces might appear on wanted posters, that bounties had been placed on their heads, and that capture would likely result in immediate execution rather than treatment as a prisoner of war. This knowledge created a level of stress that compounded the already considerable psychological pressures of their role. Intelligence networks specifically targeted snipers for elimination, using informants and collaborators to identify their movements and habits. In occupied territories, resistance fighters sometimes provided information about effective enemy snipers to Allied forces, leading to targeted operations designed to eliminate specific individuals. This meant that snipers could never fully trust their environment, as seemingly innocent civilians might be gathering intelligence on their activities. The triangulation methods employed by enemy forces represented sophisticated mathematical approaches to battlefield problem solving. Teams of observers positioned at known coordinates would record the bearing to muzzle flashes or sound sources, then use trigonometry to calculate the precise location of the shooter. These calculations could be completed within minutes using pre-prepared charts and tables, allowing rapid deployment of response forces to the calculated position. Sound-ranging equipment, originally developed for artillery spotting, was adapted specifically for counter-sniper operations. Arrays of sensitive microphones could detect the supersonic crack of bullets passing overhead and the delayed sound of the actual gunshot, providing data that allowed precise calculation of the shooter's location. This technology was particularly effective in urban environments where sound reflected off buildings in predictable patterns. The isolation experienced by snipers operating alone or in small teams created psychological challenges that were largely unique among combat roles. While infantry soldiers drew strength and support from their squad mates, snipers often spent days or weeks operating with minimal human contact, communicating only through brief radio transmissions or written reports. This isolation was both tactical and social. Tactically, large groups were impossible to conceal and moved too slowly to avoid detection. Socially, the nature of sniper work created a psychological distance between marksmen and other soldiers. The deliberate, calculated nature of sniper kills differed significantly from the chaotic violence of conventional infantry combat, leading to a sense of alienation that many snipers found difficult to articulate. Extended missions lasting several days or weeks amplified these psychological pressures. Snipers had to maintain constant alertness while managing their physical needs for food, water, and rest in hostile territory. They couldn't light fires for warmth, couldn't speak above whispers, and couldn't move freely during daylight hours. This combination of physical discomfort and mental stress, sustained over extended periods without the psychological support of unit cohesion, created conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The lack of immediate feedback and recognition for their work further contributed to the sense of isolation. Unlike infantry actions, where success was often immediately apparent and acknowledged by fellow soldiers, sniper operations were typically conducted in secret with results that might not be confirmed for days or weeks. This absence of immediate validation, combined with the moral complexity of their role, created psychological burdens that many snipers carried long after the war ended. The technological constraints facing World War II snipers created a harsh reality where success depended more on individual skill and endurance than on equipment superiority. While modern warfare has equipped marksmen with sophisticated tools that can calculate ballistics automatically and provide crystal-clear magnification at extreme ranges, their predecessors operated with equipment that would be considered laughably primitive by today's standards. The backbone of sniper operations remained the bolt-action rifle, a design that had changed little since the late 19th century. The Soviet Mosin Nagant Model 9130, adopted in 1891 and modified in 1930, exemplified the limitations snipers faced with manual cycling systems. After each shot, the sniper had to lift the bolt handle, pull it fully rearward to extract the spent cartridge case, push it forward to chamber a fresh round, and rotate it down to lock the action. This process required several seconds of deliberate movement that could prove fatal in situations requiring rapid follow-up shots. German snipers working with the Karabiner 98K faced identical constraints. The Mauser action, while renowned for its reliability and accuracy, demanded the same manual cycling process that created vulnerable moments when the sniper's attention was divided between operating the rifle and maintaining situational awareness. During these seconds of mechanical manipulation, snipers couldn't maintain their sight picture on the target area, potentially missing opportunities to engage additional targets or failing to observe the effects of their shots. The tactical implications of bolt-action limitations became particularly evident in urban combat situations where multiple targets might appear simultaneously. A sniper who had just engaged one target would find himself temporarily helpless if additional enemies appeared while he was cycling the bolt. This mechanical delay forced snipers to be extremely selective about their targets, as engaging one enemy often meant accepting that others might escape or return fire during the reload cycle. The British Lee Enfield Nommer 4 Mk1 offered a slight advantage with its faster bolt manipulation compared to the Mauser-type actions, but even this improvement provided only marginal benefits in combat situations. The fundamental limitation remained. Every shot required a multi-step manual process that created predictable periods of vulnerability. American snipers using the Springfield M1903A4 dealt with the same constraints, though some units later received the semi-automatic M1C and M1D Garand rifles. However, these semi-automatic weapons came with their own limitations, including reduced accuracy compared to purpose-built bolt-action sniper rifles and the distinctive metallic ping sound when the en-bloc clip ejected after the 8th shot, potentially revealing the sniper's position to alert enemies. The optical systems available to World War II snipers represented another significant technological barrier. German ZF-42 scopes, considered among the most advanced of the war, typically provided only 4x magnification with a relatively narrow field of view. The Soviet PU scope, mounted on selected Mosin-Nagant rifles, offered 3.5x magnification, while British and American scopes generally provided between 2.5x and 4x magnification. These magnification levels, while adequate for ranges up to 400 meters, severely limited the sniper's ability to engage targets at extended distances. Modern military scopes routinely offer 10x to 25x magnification with variable power settings, allowing snipers to adjust their optical magnification based on range and conditions. World War II snipers had no such flexibility, working with fixed magnification that represented a compromise between field of view and target resolution. The optical quality of wartime scopes suffered from manufacturing constraints imposed by wartime production demands. Glass quality was often inconsistent, with visible distortions, color fringing, and reduced light transmission that made target identification difficult in low-light conditions. The lens coatings that modern shooters take for granted were primitive or non-existent, resulting in significant light loss and internal reflections that could betray the sniper's position through scope glint. Fogging represented a persistent problem that could render scopes completely useless at critical moments. The temperature differential between the scope's interior and exterior, combined with humidity changes, would cause condensation to form on internal lens surfaces. Unlike modern scopes with nitrogen purging and sealed construction, wartime optics were vulnerable to moisture infiltration that could fog the scope for hours or even days. Soviet snipers operating during the brutal winter conditions around Leningrad and Stalingrad frequently encountered scopes that fogged completely when moving from heated buildings into sub-zero exterior temperatures. German snipers in the same theater faced identical problems, with some reporting that their scopes remained fogged for entire days when temperature fluctuations were extreme. The mechanical reliability of wartime scopes proved problematic under combat conditions. The adjustment mechanisms for windage and elevation were often crude by modern standards, with clicks that weren't precisely calibrated and adjustment screws that could work loose under recoil. Many scopes lacked positive click adjustments entirely, requiring snipers to estimate their corrections based on visual reference points on smooth adjustment dials. Reticle designs were basic, typically consisting of simple crosshairs or post and crosshair configurations without the sophisticated ranging systems found in modern optics. German scopes sometimes featured simple range-finding reticles with additional horizontal lines below the main crosshair, but these required the sniper to estimate target height accurately, a skill that demanded extensive practice and experience. The mounting systems used to attach scopes to rifles were often problematic, with side-mounted systems that didn't provide the rigid, repeatable zero that modern scope mounts deliver. Soviet PU scopes mounted to the left side of the Mosin-Nagant receiver using a system that, while functional, was prone to shifting under heavy recoil or rough handling. German ZF-42 scopes used a similar side-mounting arrangement that, while more sophisticated than the Soviet system, still couldn't match the precision of modern mounting solutions. The absence of ballistic computers forced World War II snipers to rely entirely on mental calculations, experience-based estimates, and basic reference materials for long-range shooting. Modern snipers can input atmospheric conditions, target range, and ammunition specifications into handheld computers that instantly calculate precise firing solutions. Their World War II predecessors worked with basic range cards, simple charts, and hard-won experience to estimate the complex ballistic calculations required for accurate long-range shooting. Wind reading represented one of the most challenging aspects of wartime sniping. Without electronic wind meters or sophisticated ballistic software, snipers had to estimate wind speed and direction using visual cues like grass movement, dust patterns, or the behavior of smoke. They learned to read mirage patterns through their scopes, watching for the subtle heat distortions that indicated wind direction and approximate velocity. Range estimation required snipers to develop an almost intuitive sense of distance, using techniques like the mil-dot system, appearance-based estimation, and known reference objects. German snipers were trained to estimate ranges using the apparent size of human figures at various distances, memorizing that a standing man would appear to be a certain height in their scope at 200, 300, or 400 meters. Bullet drop calculations had to be memorized for different ranges and ammunition types. Soviet snipers working with the 7.62x 54mm cartridge learned that their bullets would drop approximately 8 inches at 300 meters, 24 inches at 400 meters, and 48 inches at 500 meters when zeroed at 200 meters. These figures had to be adjusted mentally for temperature, altitude, and ammunition variations, all without the benefit of electronic calculation aids. The primitive state of camouflage technology during World War II forced snipers to rely heavily on natural materials and basic concealment principles. While modern snipers have access to advanced synthetic materials, specialized camouflage patterns designed through scientific study of human visual perception, and sophisticated ghillie suit materials, their wartime predecessors worked with burlap, local vegetation, and basic camouflage nets. German snipers received some of the war's most advanced camouflage equipment, including reversible winter-summer smocks with patterns like the famous Splinter design. However, even these advanced garments were crude compared to modern camouflage technology. The patterns were based on artistic interpretation rather than scientific analysis of how the human eye detects shapes and movement. Soviet snipers often worked with even more basic camouflage, frequently relying on standard uniforms supplemented with whatever natural materials they could gather from their operational area. They would attach grass, leaves, and small branches to their clothing using string or wire, creating improvised camouflage that had to be constantly updated as vegetation changed with seasons and combat damage. The ghillie suits used by some snipers during World War II were primitive constructions of burlap strips and natural vegetation attached to basic garments. Unlike modern ghillie suits with their sophisticated layering systems and synthetic materials designed to break up the human silhouette while maintaining mobility, wartime versions were often bulky, heavy, and restrictive. British snipers, drawing on their experience with Scottish gamekeepers who had developed early ghillie suit concepts, created some of the war's more effective personal camouflage systems. However, these suits were typically one-off creations made by individual snipers using whatever materials were available, rather than standardized equipment produced with consistent specifications. The camouflage nets available to snipers were basic affairs, usually consisting of simple mesh with attached strips of cloth or natural materials. These nets provided some concealment, but lacked the sophisticated design features of modern camouflage systems. They were often too small to provide adequate concealment for both the sniper and his equipment, forcing difficult choices about what to conceal and what to leave exposed. Face camouflage relied on basic techniques using burnt cork, mud, or crude camouflage paints when available. Modern snipers have access to specialized camouflage makeup designed specifically for military use, with colors scientifically selected to blend with various environments and formulations that won't run with perspiration or weather exposure. The lack of advanced camouflage technology meant that successful concealment depended almost entirely on the sniper's understanding of natural concealment principles and his ability to select and modify positions that offered inherent camouflage advantages. This placed enormous emphasis on fieldcraft skills, terrain analysis, and the patience to remain motionless for extended periods while maintaining tactical awareness. Equipment maintenance under field conditions presented constant challenges that modern snipers rarely face. Without access to sophisticated cleaning solvents, precision tools, and replacement parts, World War II snipers had to maintain their equipment using basic field expedients and improvised solutions. A scope with internal fogging might be repaired by carefully disassembling it in field conditions, cleaning the lenses with whatever materials were available, and reassembling it without proper tools or clean room conditions. The weight and bulk of wartime sniper equipment created mobility problems that affected tactical operations. A typical German sniper carried his Kar 98K rifle weighing approximately 8.5 pounds, plus scope, ammunition, personal equipment, camouflage materials, and observation tools. Soviet snipers with their Mosin-Nagant rifles faced similar weight burdens, all while maintaining the mobility necessary for the constant position changes that sniper operations demanded. The numbing cold of the Eastern Front created conditions that pushed human endurance beyond its natural limits, transforming basic survival into a constant struggle that overshadowed even the tactical challenges of sniper warfare. When temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees F and below during the winters of 1941-1943, snipers found themselves fighting a two-front war against both enemy forces and the brutal Russian climate that seemed determined to kill them through exposure alone. Soviet sniper Nikolai Ilyin described the sensation of metal rifle parts becoming so cold that exposed skin would instantly freeze to any surface it touched. The bolt handle of his Mosin-Nagant became a torture device that could strip flesh from his palm if he attempted to operate it without proper hand protection. Yet thick winter mittens made precise trigger control nearly impossible. German snipers faced identical problems with their Karabiner 98K rifles, discovering that the metal components became so brittle in extreme cold that firing pins could shatter and trigger mechanisms could freeze solid. The optical equipment that snipers depended upon for target acquisition proved particularly vulnerable to temperature extremes. Scope lenses would fog completely when snipers moved from any source of warmth into the sub-zero exterior temperatures, creating condensation that could take hours to clear. German ZF-42 scopes, despite their advanced design, would develop internal ice crystals that rendered them completely useless until they could be warmed and dried, a process that often required returning to heated shelters that might be miles behind the front lines. More insidious was the effect of extreme cold on the human eye itself. Extended periods of observation through rifle scopes in sub-zero temperatures caused the moisture in snipers' eyes to freeze, creating painful ice crystals on eyelashes and around the eye socket. The constant tearing caused by cold wind would freeze immediately upon contact with the face, creating ice buildups that interfered with sight picture and forced snipers to regularly clear their vision using painful manual removal of ice formations. Soviet snipers operating during the siege of Leningrad learned to carry small pieces of cloth or leather that they would place between their eye and the scope eyepiece to prevent their skin from freezing to the metal. This improvised solution created its own problems, as the additional material between eye and scope reduced the already limited field of view and made rapid target acquisition more difficult. The ammunition itself became unreliable in extreme cold conditions. Cartridge cases would contract, affecting the precise tolerances required for consistent accuracy. More critically, the lubricants used in rifle mechanisms would thicken to the consistency of paste, causing actions to cycle sluggishly or jam completely at critical moments. German snipers reported instances where their rifles would fire normally for the first shot, but fail to extract the spent cartridge case due to frozen lubricants, leaving them with single-shot weapons in situations that demanded rapid follow-up capability. Frostbite became an occupational hazard that claimed fingers, toes, and facial features with ruthless efficiency. Snipers were required to remain motionless for extended periods while observing target areas, often lying prone in snow-covered positions for 6 to 8 hours at a time. The combination of immobility and direct contact with frozen ground created conditions where frostbite could develop within minutes on exposed skin and within hours on areas covered only by standard military clothing. The extremities suffered most severely, with trigger fingers becoming particular casualties of prolonged exposure. Soviet sniper training emphasized exercises designed to maintain finger dexterity in cold conditions, but the reality of extended observation periods made frostbite almost inevitable. Many experienced snipers developed permanent nerve damage in their trigger fingers, affecting their shooting accuracy for the remainder of their military service. Equipment failures in extreme cold went beyond simple mechanical problems to encompass complete system breakdowns that could prove fatal. Leather slings would become rigid and crack, metal components would contract enough to affect rifle zero, and wooden stocks would split along the grain when subjected to rapid temperature changes. German snipers operating around Stalingrad reported that their rifle stocks would crack audibly during firing, creating structural weaknesses that affected accuracy and reliability. The North African theater presented an entirely different set of environmental challenges that were equally demanding but manifested in opposite extremes. Desert temperatures regularly exceeded 120 degrees F during daylight hours, creating conditions where metal rifle components became too hot to touch with bare skin. British snipers operating in the Western Desert Campaign discovered that their Lee Enfield rifles would become so heated by direct sunlight that the metal would literally burn exposed flesh on contact. The intense heat created mirage effects that made accurate range estimation nearly impossible during peak temperature periods. The rising heat columns would distort the view through rifle scopes, creating wavering images that made precise target identification extremely difficult. German snipers with the Afrika Korps learned to restrict their operations to early morning and late evening hours when atmospheric conditions were more stable, but this limitation severely reduced their operational effectiveness. Sand infiltration proved to be a constant mechanical threat that could disable rifles and optics within hours of exposure. The fine desert sand would work its way into every mechanical tolerance, creating abrasive conditions that would wear down moving parts and cause actions to bind. Scope adjustments would become locked in place by sand accumulation, and lens surfaces would become scratched and pitted by wind-blown particles. Water scarcity in desert operations created additional complications for equipment maintenance. The standard procedure for cleaning sand from rifle mechanisms required significant amounts of water, a resource that was often unavailable in sufficient quantities for both human consumption and equipment maintenance. Snipers were forced to choose between personal hydration and weapon maintenance, decisions that could prove fatal in either direction. The reflective properties of desert sand created camouflage challenges that were virtually impossible to overcome with available materials. Standard camouflage patterns designed for European vegetation were completely ineffective against the uniform tan and beige colors of desert terrain. British snipers attempted to create effective concealment using local materials, but the lack of natural vegetation in many desert areas made traditional camouflage techniques nearly useless. Heat exhaustion and dehydration affected cognitive function in ways that directly impacted shooting accuracy. The mental calculations required for range estimation, wind compensation, and ballistic corrections became increasingly difficult as core body temperature rose and dehydration progressed. German snipers in North Africa reported that their shooting accuracy would degrade significantly during the hottest parts of the day, not due to equipment problems, but because their heat-stressed brains could no longer perform the complex calculations required for precision shooting. The mountainous terrain of the Italian campaign created unique challenges that combined altitude effects with treacherous weather conditions. Snipers operating in the Apennine Mountains faced rapid weather changes that could shift from clear conditions to dense fog within minutes, eliminating visibility and making previously planned shots impossible to execute. Altitude effects on ballistics became significant factors that most snipers were unprepared to calculate. The reduced air density at higher elevations caused bullets to travel with less atmospheric resistance, resulting in flatter trajectories and higher impact points than snipers expected based on their sea-level training. German mountain troops received some training in high-altitude shooting, but Allied snipers often had to learn these corrections through trial and error under combat conditions. The steep terrain created shooting positions that were inherently unstable, forcing snipers to adapt their techniques to slopes that might exceed 30 degrees. Traditional prone shooting positions became impossible on steep mountainsides, requiring snipers to develop improvised shooting stances that were both stable enough for accurate shooting and concealed enough to avoid detection. Rock falls and avalanches posed constant threats that went beyond enemy action. The sound of a rifle shot echoing through mountain valleys could trigger avalanches or rock slides that would bury snipers in their positions. This acoustic signature problem was particularly severe in winter conditions when snow loads were unstable, and any loud noise could trigger massive slides. The Pacific Theater confronted snipers with tropical conditions that created their own unique set of challenges. The combination of extreme humidity, intense heat, and dense vegetation created an environment where equipment deterioration was accelerated and human endurance was tested in ways that temperate climate training had not prepared them for. Rust and corrosion became constant threats to rifle mechanisms in the high humidity environment of Pacific Islands. Steel components would develop surface rust within hours of exposure to the salt-laden air, and this corrosion would accelerate rapidly in the tropical heat. American snipers learned to disassemble and clean their rifles daily, but even this maintenance schedule was often insufficient to prevent corrosion-related malfunctions. The dense jungle vegetation that provided excellent concealment also created visibility problems that severely limited effective engagement ranges. Snipers who had trained for shots at 400-500 meters found themselves operating in environments where 100-meter visibility was exceptional. This close-range environment changed the fundamental nature of sniper operations, requiring different tactics and equipment configurations. Tropical diseases posed threats that were completely outside the scope of conventional military training. Malaria, dengue fever, and various parasitic infections could incapacitate snipers for weeks or months, removing experienced marksmen from operations at critical moments. The medical supplies required to prevent or treat these conditions added significant weight to already heavy equipment loads. The European battlefields presented their own environmental challenges, particularly the omnipresent mud that characterized much of the fighting in France, Belgium, and the Low Countries. The combination of heavy artillery bombardment and seasonal rainfall created conditions where maintaining clean equipment became nearly impossible. Mud infiltration affected every aspect of sniper operations. Rifle actions would become clogged with mud that could cause complete mechanical failure at critical moments. Scope lenses would become covered with mud splatter from artillery impacts, requiring constant cleaning that exposed snipers to detection. Ammunition had to be carefully protected from moisture infiltration that could cause misfires or hangfires. The waterlogged conditions made dry storage of equipment virtually impossible. Snipers would spend days in positions where everything they carried became thoroughly soaked, from clothing to ammunition to optical equipment. The lack of dry storage created conditions where metal components would rust rapidly and organic materials like leather would rot and fall apart. Trench foot and other moisture-related medical conditions became serious problems for snipers who were required to remain in wet positions for extended periods. Unlike infantry soldiers who might rotate out of forward positions regularly, snipers often remained in waterlogged observation posts for days at a time, creating ideal conditions for the development of serious foot and leg infections. The physical toll of extended observation periods created cumulative health problems that affected operational effectiveness over time. Remaining motionless in cramped positions for hours at a time caused muscle cramps, circulation problems, and joint stiffness that could persist for days after a mission was completed. Circulation problems were particularly severe in the extremities, where reduced blood flow caused by prolonged immobility could lead to temporary paralysis of hands and feet. Snipers would emerge from long observation periods unable to feel their fingers or toes, creating dangerous situations where they couldn't operate their weapons or move quickly if detected by enemy forces. The psychological effects of physical discomfort compounded the mental stress of sniper operations. The constant pain from cramped muscles, the burning sensation of strained eyes, and the general physical misery of remaining motionless in uncomfortable positions for extended periods created additional psychological burdens that affected decision-making and shooting accuracy. Sleep deprivation became endemic among snipers operating in all theaters, as the demands of extended observation periods conflicted with basic human sleep requirements. Multi-day missions where snipers had to maintain constant vigilance while remaining concealed created conditions where micro-sleep episodes could occur involuntarily, potentially exposing snipers to detection or causing them to miss critical opportunities. The combination of environmental stresses, physical discomfort, and operational demands created a cumulative effect that pushed many snipers beyond their physical and mental limits. Equipment failures caused by extreme conditions, combined with the human factors of exhaustion and environmental exposure, created operational conditions that tested the absolute limits of what could be accomplished with the technology and training methods available during World War II. The psychological landscape of sniper warfare in World War II created a unique form of mental torment that distinguished marksmen from every other combat role on the battlefield. While infantry soldiers engaged enemies in the chaotic anonymity of mass combat, snipers confronted their targets through magnified optics that transformed killing into an intensely personal act. The 4x magnification of a German ZF-42 scope brought enemy faces into sharp detail, revealing individual features, expressions, and human characteristics that made each kill a deliberate, calculated execution rather than an impersonal casualty of war. Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko described the haunting clarity with which she could observe her targets through her PU scope, noting how she could see facial expressions, watch enemies eating meals, or observe them reading letters from home moments before she pulled the trigger. This intimate knowledge of her targets as individual human beings, rather than abstract enemies, created psychological burdens that conventional soldiers rarely experienced. The magnified view through rifle scopes forced snipers to confront the humanity of their targets in ways that machine gunners, artillery crews, or riflemen engaging at longer ranges could avoid. The deliberate nature of sniper kills eliminated the psychological buffer that rapid, instinctive combat provided to other soldiers. Infantry combat typically occurred in frenzied bursts where soldiers fired at movement, muzzle flashes, or general target areas without clearly seeing the results of their individual shots. Snipers, by contrast, had to consciously choose specific targets, carefully aim at vital areas of the human body, deliberately squeeze the trigger, and then observe the immediate effects of their shots through their scopes. German sniper training emphasized the importance of observing bullet impact to confirm kills and assess the effectiveness of their shooting, but this requirement forced marksmen to watch their targets die in graphic detail. The high-velocity impact of rifle bullets on human targets created devastating wounds that were clearly visible through rifle scopes, forcing snipers to witness the immediate and often prolonged suffering their shots caused. The psychological impact of this enforced observation was compounded by the sniper's role as both executioner and witness. Unlike other combat roles where the results of violence were often obscured by distance, smoke, or the chaos of battle, snipers had to maintain their sight picture through the scope to confirm their kills, watching as their targets collapsed, convulsed, or attempted to crawl to safety after being wounded. American snipers in the Pacific Theater reported particular psychological distress when engaging Japanese soldiers who would continue fighting even after receiving mortal wounds. The cultural conditioning that prevented Japanese soldiers from surrendering meant that wounded targets would often continue attempting to fight or move toward cover, forcing snipers to fire additional shots while watching their targets' prolonged death struggles through their scopes. The moral complexity of engaging unsuspecting targets created additional psychological burdens that challenged many snipers' concepts of honorable combat. Traditional military ethics emphasized facing enemies in direct confrontation, but sniper warfare required shooting unsuspecting targets who had no opportunity to defend themselves or even know they were under observation. British snipers operating in Normandy after D-Day frequently encountered German soldiers engaged in routine activities, eating meals, writing letters, performing maintenance on equipment, or simply talking with their comrades. The intimate view through rifle scopes allowed snipers to observe these human moments before deliberately ending them with carefully aimed shots. This voyeuristic aspect of sniper operations created a sense of moral unease that many marksmen found difficult to reconcile with their understanding of legitimate warfare. The targeting of enemy officers and NCOs, while tactically sound, created additional moral complications. These high-value targets were often observed for extended periods before engagement, allowing snipers to develop a sense of familiarity with their intended victims. German snipers would watch Soviet officers conducting briefings, studying maps, or interacting with their subordinates, gaining insights into their personalities and leadership styles before killing them. Soviet snipers targeting German officers faced similar psychological challenges. The extended observation periods required to identify high-value targets meant watching these individuals perform their duties, interact with subordinates, and display human characteristics that made them seem less like abstract enemies and more like specific individuals with families, responsibilities, and personal histories. The intelligence value of high-ranking targets made their elimination a priority, but the personal nature of these assassinations created psychological burdens that differed significantly from the impersonal nature of conventional combat. Snipers knew that killing a company commander or battalion staff officer would disrupt enemy operations far beyond the tactical impact of eliminating individual soldiers. But this knowledge came with the understanding that they were deliberately targeting individuals whose deaths would have cascading effects on dozens or hundreds of other soldiers. The success of sniper operations against high-value targets inevitably led to increased enemy vigilance and more sophisticated countermeasures. German forces that had lost officers to Soviet snipers would implement strict protocols requiring officers to avoid exposed positions, wear enlisted men's uniforms to avoid identification, and travel with increased security measures. These countermeasures made subsequent sniper operations more difficult and dangerous, creating a cycle where successful snipers found themselves facing increasingly sophisticated opposition. American snipers who had proven effective against Japanese officers in the Pacific found that their success led to dedicated counter-sniper operations specifically designed to eliminate them. Japanese forces would assign entire squads to hunt individual American marksmen who had proven particularly effective, using coordinated sweeps, decoy operations, and specialized equipment to track down specific snipers whose activities had been identified through intelligence networks. The knowledge that successful operations would inevitably lead to increased personal danger created a psychological paradox where effectiveness in the sniper role directly correlated with increased risk of death or capture. This understanding forced snipers to weigh the tactical value of each potential engagement against the likelihood that success would make them priority targets for enemy elimination efforts. The moral weight of engaging enemies during routine, non-combat activities challenged traditional concepts of fair play and honorable warfare that many soldiers had internalized during their upbringing and military training. Shooting an enemy soldier who was actively fighting seemed morally straightforward, but killing someone who was eating breakfast, reading mail from home, or performing maintenance duties created ethical dilemmas that had no clear resolution within military doctrine. German snipers operating on the Eastern Front frequently observed Soviet soldiers engaged in mundane activities that highlighted their humanity, sharing food, tending to wounded comrades, or simply trying to stay warm in the brutal winter conditions. The intimate view through rifle scopes made these human moments impossible to ignore, forcing snipers to confront the reality that their targets were individuals with the same basic needs, fears, and desires as themselves. The psychological impact of these observations was intensified by the extended periods snipers spent watching their intended targets. Unlike the split-second decisions required in conventional combat, sniper operations often involved hours or even days of observation before the optimal shooting opportunity presented itself. This extended surveillance created a paradoxical intimacy between sniper and target, where the marksman might observe his intended victim's daily routines, personal habits, and individual characteristics before killing him. Soviet snipers targeting German positions around Stalingrad reported watching enemy soldiers for days at a time, learning their schedules, identifying their personalities, and observing their interactions with comrades. This forced familiarity made the eventual killing feel less like legitimate combat and more like premeditated murder, creating psychological conflicts that many snipers struggled to resolve. The targeting of enemies engaged in medical activities created particularly acute moral dilemmas. International law protected medical personnel, but the reality of combat often blurred the lines between legitimate military targets and protected individuals. Snipers would observe enemy soldiers providing first aid to wounded comrades, creating situations where the moral legitimacy of engagement was unclear. German snipers on the Eastern Front faced situations where Soviet soldiers were simultaneously acting as combatants and medical personnel, carrying weapons while also tending to wounded comrades. The extended observation periods that sniper operations required allowed marksmen to witness these dual roles, creating moral complexity about whether such targets were legitimate under the laws of war. The knowledge that capture would likely result in immediate execution rather than treatment as a prisoner of war created additional psychological pressures that affected every aspect of sniper operations. While Geneva Convention protections theoretically applied to all combatants, the reality of battlefield conditions meant that snipers were often viewed as particularly dangerous enemies who warranted special treatment. Soviet treatment of captured German snipers was notoriously harsh, with many marksmen facing immediate execution or prolonged torture before being killed. German propaganda emphasized these brutal treatments to motivate their own snipers, but the knowledge that capture meant certain death created psychological pressures that affected operational decision-making and risk assessment. German snipers operating on the Eastern Front understood that Soviet forces considered them priority targets for elimination, not capture. This knowledge influenced every tactical decision, from position selection to escape route planning, as snipers knew that any mistake that led to capture would result in death under circumstances that were likely to be prolonged and brutal. American snipers in the Pacific Theater faced similar risks, as Japanese military culture viewed snipers as particularly dishonorable enemies who deserved special punishment if captured. The Japanese tendency to torture captured enemies was well documented, and snipers knew that their specialized role made them likely targets for the most extreme forms of abuse. The psychological impact of knowing that capture meant certain death created a level of operational stress that was unique among combat roles. Infantry soldiers, tank crews, and aircrew all faced the possibility of capture, but they could reasonably expect treatment as prisoners of war under international law. Snipers operated with the knowledge that capture would result in immediate execution or prolonged torture, creating psychological pressures that affected their ability to take calculated risks that other soldiers might accept. British snipers operating in occupied Europe faced additional psychological burdens related to the treatment of captured special operations personnel. German forces had issued explicit orders regarding the treatment of commandos and special operations troops, often requiring their immediate execution rather than treatment as prisoners of war. Snipers operating behind enemy lines knew that their capture would likely result in execution under these orders. The isolation inherent in sniper operations amplified these psychological pressures by removing the social support systems that helped other soldiers cope with combat stress. Infantry soldiers could discuss their experiences with squad mates, share the psychological burden of combat through group cohesion, and find emotional support within their units. Snipers, operating alone or in small teams, lacked these support mechanisms. The secretive nature of sniper operations meant that marksmen often couldn't discuss their experiences with other soldiers who hadn't shared similar roles. The intimate, personal nature of sniper kills created psychological burdens that were difficult to articulate to soldiers whose combat experience involved the anonymous violence of conventional warfare. The extended periods of solitude required for sniper operations created additional psychological stresses. Spending days or weeks in isolated positions with minimal human contact created conditions where snipers had excessive time to contemplate the moral implications of their actions without the distracting influence of social interaction or unit activities. The psychological impact of successful sniper operations extended beyond the immediate effects of individual kills to encompass the broader implications of their role in the war effort. Snipers understood that their actions had strategic value that extended far beyond the tactical impact of eliminating individual enemies, but this knowledge came with the understanding that they were deliberately terrorizing enemy forces through targeted assassinations. The fear that effective snipers created among enemy troops was a recognized psychological weapon that military commanders deliberately exploited. Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaitsev became legendary figures whose reputations were used to demoralize German forces, but the snipers themselves had to live with the knowledge that they had become symbols of terror rather than conventional soldiers. German snipers operating in urban environments like Stalingrad understood that their activities were designed not just to eliminate individual targets, but to create a climate of fear that would affect the morale and effectiveness of entire enemy units. This psychological warfare aspect of their role created additional moral complexity about the nature of their contribution to the war effort. The long-term psychological effects of sniper operations often manifested after the immediate dangers of combat had ended. Many snipers reported persistent nightmares, intrusive memories of specific kills observed through their scopes, and difficulty forming normal social relationships after the war. The intimate nature of sniper kills, combined with the moral complexity of their role, created psychological wounds that were often more persistent than those experienced by soldiers in conventional combat roles. The psychological trauma of intimate, magnified killing was compounded by training programs that were often woefully inadequate for the complex realities of sniper warfare. While the mental burden of deliberate assassination through rifle scopes created lasting psychological damage, the technical deficiencies in sniper training across all armies meant that many marksmen entered combat situations unprepared for the sophisticated challenges they would face. The German Army's sniper training program, considered among the most advanced of the war, still suffered from fundamental limitations that left many marksmen vulnerable to experienced enemy forces. The Wehrmacht's Scharfschützenschule at Senneliger provided approximately 6 weeks of intensive training, but this program focused heavily on marksmanship fundamentals while providing insufficient instruction in the advanced fieldcraft techniques that determine survival in combat environments. German sniper candidates learned to shoot accurately at known distances under controlled conditions, mastering the technical aspects of rifle operation and basic ballistic principles. However, the training program allocated minimal time to teaching the subtle arts of camouflage construction, natural concealment selection, and movement techniques that would allow snipers to operate undetected in hostile territory. Many German snipers arrived at front-line units with excellent shooting skills, but inadequate knowledge of how to remain invisible to experienced enemy observers. The Wehrmacht's training doctrine emphasized rapid deployment of snipers to meet immediate battlefield needs, resulting in abbreviated courses that covered essential marksmanship skills, while sacrificing the extended fieldcraft instruction that veteran snipers considered crucial for survival. German training officers, under pressure to produce qualified marksmen quickly, focused on skills that could be taught and evaluated in controlled environments, rather than the intuitive fieldcraft abilities that required extended practice in varied terrain. Soviet sniper training programs varied dramatically in quality and duration, depending on when and where they were conducted. Early war training, conducted under the desperate conditions of 1941 and 1942, often consisted of hasty courses lasting only 2 to 3 weeks. These abbreviated programs focused almost exclusively on basic marksmanship, with trainees learning to operate their Mosin-Nagant rifles and PU scopes, but receiving minimal instruction in stalking techniques, camouflage construction, or advanced tactical employment. The Central Women's School of Sniper Training, established in 1943, provided more comprehensive instruction lasting approximately 5 months. Female snipers like Lyudmila Pavlichenko received extensive training in fieldcraft techniques, including detailed instruction in camouflage construction, concealment selection, and movement techniques. However, even this extended program suffered from limitations imposed by training facility constraints and the urgent need to deploy qualified snipers to active combat zones. Soviet training emphasized collective action and coordination with infantry units, reflecting the Red Army's doctrinal preference for integrated operations. However, this approach often failed to prepare snipers for the independent operations that combat conditions frequently demanded. Many Soviet snipers found themselves operating in small teams or individually, situations for which their training had provided inadequate preparation. The quality of Soviet sniper training improved significantly as the war progressed and experienced combat veterans returned to training roles. By 1944, Soviet sniper schools were incorporating lessons learned from actual combat operations, including advanced techniques for urban warfare, counter-sniper operations, and extended independent missions. However, the earlier training deficiencies meant that many Soviet snipers had learned critical survival skills through combat experience rather than formal instruction. American sniper training during World War II was characterized by inconsistency and improvisation rather than standardized doctrine. The U.S. military entered the war without established sniper training programs, forcing individual units to develop their own instruction methods based on available personnel and resources. This decentralized approach resulted in dramatic variations in training quality, with some units receiving excellent instruction from experienced hunters and competitive shooters, while others received minimal preparation for sniper operations. The Marine Corps developed some of the war's most effective sniper training programs, drawing on the marksmanship traditions established at places like Camp Perry and incorporating lessons learned from early Pacific combat operations. Marine sniper training emphasized practical fieldcraft skills, including extensive instruction in jungle camouflage, stalking techniques, and the specialized challenges of operating in tropical environments. However, even the Marine Corps programs suffered from time constraints and resource limitations that prevented comprehensive training in all aspects of sniper warfare. Marine snipers received excellent instruction in marksmanship and basic fieldcraft, but often lacked training in advanced ballistics, range estimation techniques, and the complex calculations required for precision shooting under varied environmental conditions. Army sniper training was even more inconsistent, with individual divisions and regiments developing their own programs based on available expertise and perceived needs. Some units were fortunate to have experienced hunters or competitive shooters who could provide effective instruction, while others relied on hastily trained instructors who lacked the practical experience necessary to teach advanced sniper techniques. British sniper training drew heavily on the country's sporting traditions and the expertise of professional stalkers and gamekeepers who understood the principles of fieldcraft and concealment. The British Army's sniper training programs emphasized practical skills over theoretical knowledge, with extensive instruction in camouflage construction, natural concealment, and the patient observation techniques that British sporting traditions had developed over centuries. However, British training programs suffered from their own limitations, particularly in preparing snipers for the industrial warfare conditions they would encounter in Europe. The fieldcraft techniques that worked effectively in the Scottish Highlands or English countryside proved inadequate for the urban warfare conditions of Normandy, the Low Countries, and Germany. Many British snipers found themselves unprepared for the challenges of operating in heavily built-up areas where traditional concealment methods were ineffective. The British emphasis on individual initiative and independent action, while valuable in many situations, sometimes left snipers unprepared for the coordination with other units that modern warfare demanded. British snipers were trained to operate independently, but often lacked instruction in the communication procedures and tactical coordination that would allow them to integrate effectively with infantry operations. One of the most significant deficiencies across all training programs was the inadequate instruction in advanced camouflage techniques and natural concealment principles. While most programs provided basic instruction in camouflage application and the use of available camouflage materials, few taught the sophisticated understanding of human visual perception and detection methods that experienced snipers considered essential for survival. German training programs taught snipers to use available camouflage equipment and natural materials, but provided insufficient instruction in the principles of visual detection that would allow them to understand how enemy observers might spot concealed positions. Many German snipers learned through bitter experience that effective camouflage required understanding not just how to blend with the environment, but how to avoid the subtle visual cues that trained observers could detect. Soviet training in camouflage construction was often rudimentary, focusing on the mechanical application of available materials rather than the underlying principles that determined effectiveness. Soviet snipers learned to attach vegetation to their uniforms and equipment, but often lacked understanding of how to select materials that would remain effective as lighting conditions changed throughout the day or as seasonal variations altered the natural environment. American training programs, when they existed, often emphasized the use of manufactured camouflage equipment rather than teaching snipers to construct effective concealment using natural materials. This approach proved problematic in combat environments where manufactured materials were unavailable or inappropriate for local conditions. American snipers in the Pacific Theater frequently found themselves operating in environments where their training in temperate zone camouflage was completely inadequate for tropical conditions. The lack of proper instruction in stalking techniques left many snipers vulnerable to detection during movement between positions. While most training programs taught basic principles of quiet movement and route selection, few provided the extensive practice necessary to develop the instinctive movement skills that allowed experienced snipers to traverse hostile territory undetected. German snipers received some instruction in stalking techniques, but the training was often conducted in controlled environments that bore little resemblance to actual combat conditions. Training areas were typically free of the debris, obstacles, and hazards that characterized actual battlefields, leaving snipers unprepared for the complex movement challenges they would encounter in combat. Soviet stalking instruction was often limited to basic principles of quiet movement and concealment during travel. The training programs rarely provided extensive practice in the patient, methodical movement techniques that allowed snipers to approach target areas without detection. Many Soviet snipers learned advanced stalking skills through combat experience, often paying a heavy price in casualties during the learning process. American training in stalking techniques was inconsistent and often inadequate. Some units received excellent instruction from experienced hunters who understood the principles of approaching game animals undetected, while others received minimal training that left them unprepared for the challenges of moving through hostile territory without detection. The absence of adequate spotter training represented one of the most significant deficiencies in World War II sniper programs. While modern sniper operations rely heavily on trained observer teams for target identification, range estimation, and security, most World War II snipers operated without properly trained spotters or received minimal instruction in spotter-sniper coordination. German sniper training included some instruction in team operations, but the emphasis was primarily on individual marksmanship rather than the complex coordination between sniper and spotter that maximizes effectiveness. German snipers often operated with hastily trained assistants who lacked the specialized skills necessary for effective observation and target identification. The German training system failed to adequately prepare spotters for their critical role in range estimation and environmental assessment. Many German sniper teams operated with spotters who could identify targets, but lacked the technical knowledge necessary to provide accurate range estimates or assess environmental conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. Soviet sniper training placed even less emphasis on spotter coordination, with most programs focusing exclusively on individual marksmanship skills. Soviet snipers frequently operated alone or with minimally trained assistants who provided security rather than skilled observation support. This limitation forced Soviet snipers to perform all observation, range estimation, and environmental assessment tasks themselves, significantly reducing their operational effectiveness. American sniper training, where it existed, rarely included comprehensive instruction in spotter-sniper coordination. The decentralized nature of American training meant that some units developed effective team procedures, while others operated with minimal coordination between snipers and their assistants. This inconsistency resulted in widely varying levels of effectiveness among American sniper teams. The lack of proper spotter training had cascading effects on sniper effectiveness that extended beyond simple target identification. Trained spotters could provide continuous observation of target areas, while snipers focused on shooting preparations, allowing teams to maintain situational awareness and identify threats that individual snipers might miss while concentrating on their primary targets. Without trained spotters, snipers were forced to divide their attention between target observation, range estimation, environmental assessment, and security concerns. This division of attention reduced their effectiveness in all areas and increased their vulnerability to counter sniper operations and other threats. The absence of standardized procedures for spotter-sniper communication created additional problems in units that attempted to employ observer teams. Without established protocols for information exchange, many teams developed ad hoc communication methods that were inefficient and potentially dangerous in combat situations. Advanced ballistics instruction represented another critical deficiency in most World War II sniper training programs. While snipers received basic instruction in rifle operation and fundamental marksmanship principles, few programs provided comprehensive training in the complex ballistic calculations required for precision shooting under varied environmental conditions. German training programs included some instruction in ballistic principles, but the emphasis was on memorizing predetermined range cards and basic correction factors, rather than understanding the underlying physics that determined bullet trajectory. German snipers learned to apply standard corrections for common ranges and conditions, but often lacked the knowledge necessary to calculate corrections for unusual situations or environmental extremes. The German system of range cards and predetermined corrections worked adequately under standard conditions, but proved inadequate when snipers encountered environmental factors that weren't covered in their training materials. Temperature extremes, unusual wind conditions, and significant altitude variations created ballistic challenges that many German snipers were unprepared to address. Soviet ballistics instruction was often limited to basic principles of bullet drop and simple range estimation techniques. Soviet snipers learned to estimate ranges using visual reference methods and apply basic corrections for bullet drop, but they rarely received instruction in the complex calculations required for precision shooting under challenging environmental conditions. The Soviet emphasis on close-range urban warfare, while tactically sound for many Eastern Front conditions, resulted in training programs that didn't adequately prepare snipers for the longer-range precision shooting that some situations demanded. Soviet snipers became highly effective at ranges under 300 meters, but often lacked the ballistic knowledge necessary for precision shooting at extended ranges. American ballistics training was inconsistent and often inadequate. Some units received excellent instruction from experienced competitive shooters who understood advanced ballistic principles, while others received minimal training that left snipers unprepared for the complex calculations required for precision shooting. The American emphasis on technological solutions, while valuable in some contexts, sometimes resulted in training programs that focused on equipment operation rather than fundamental ballistic understanding. American snipers learned to use available equipment effectively, but often lacked the theoretical knowledge necessary to adapt to unusual conditions or equipment failures. Environmental factors instruction was particularly deficient across all training programs. While snipers received basic information about temperature and wind effects on bullet trajectory, few programs provided comprehensive training in the complex environmental assessments required for precision shooting under extreme conditions. Wind reading instruction was often limited to basic techniques for estimating wind speed and direction using visual cues. Snipers learned to observe grass movement, dust patterns, and other indicators, but they rarely received training in the sophisticated wind reading techniques that experienced marksmen considered essential for consistent accuracy. Temperature effects on ballistics were often covered in theoretical terms without practical instruction in how to calculate corrections for extreme temperature variations. Snipers learned that temperature affected bullet velocity and trajectory, but often lacked the practical knowledge necessary to apply appropriate corrections under field conditions. Altitude effects on ballistics were rarely covered in training programs, despite the significant impact that elevation changes could have on bullet trajectory. Snipers operating in mountainous terrain often encountered ballistic conditions that their training had not prepared them to address. The combination of these training deficiencies created a situation where many World War II snipers entered combat with inadequate preparation for the complex challenges they would face. While some individuals overcame these limitations through exceptional natural ability or extensive combat experience, many others paid a heavy price for training deficiencies that left them vulnerable to experienced enemy forces and unprepared for the sophisticated demands of modern sniper warfare. The sophisticated training deficiencies that plagued sniper programs across all armies were further compounded by supply chain failures that left even well-trained marksmen operating with substandard equipment and inadequate resources. The specialized nature of sniper operations demanded precision ammunition, maintained optical equipment, and specialized gear, but the realities of wartime logistics meant that these critical supplies were often the first casualties of overstretched supply lines and competing military priorities. Match-grade ammunition, the foundation of accurate long-range shooting, existed in theory within military supply systems, but rarely reached frontline snipers in adequate quantities. The German Army's 7.92 Mauser cartridges designated for sniper use were manufactured to higher tolerances than standard infantry ammunition, with carefully selected powder charges and precisely seated bullets designed to deliver consistent accuracy at extended ranges. However, the industrial demands of total war meant that ammunition factories prioritized quantity over quality, with match-grade production representing a tiny fraction of total output. German snipers operating on the Eastern Front frequently found themselves rationed to as few as 5 match-grade cartridges per day, forcing them to supplement their ammunition supply with standard infantry rounds that significantly degraded their accuracy potential. The standard Wehrmacht 7.92 ammunition, while adequate for infantry use at ranges under 300 meters, lacked the consistency necessary for precision shooting beyond 400 meters. Bullet weights varied by several grains between cartridges, powder charges were inconsistent, and case preparations were crude compared to the standards required for precision shooting. Soviet ammunition supply problems were even more severe, with the 7.62x54 mmR cartridges reaching sniper units often showing dramatic quality variations that made consistent accuracy nearly impossible. The Soviet Union's industrial mobilization prioritized rapid production over precision manufacturing, resulting in ammunition that varied significantly in performance characteristics even within individual production lots. Soviet snipers learned to fire small quantities of ammunition when possible, segregating cartridges that demonstrated similar ballistic performance for use during critical engagements. The lack of consistent ammunition forced Soviet snipers to develop improvised testing procedures that consumed precious rounds while attempting to identify cartridges suitable for precision shooting. Experienced snipers would fire sample rounds at known distances, measuring point-of-impact variations to identify ammunition lots that demonstrated acceptable consistency. This process typically consumed 10-15 rounds for every 100 cartridges received, further reducing the already limited supply of precision ammunition available for actual combat operations. American snipers faced similar ammunition consistency problems, particularly with the .306 Springfield cartridges used in M1903A4 rifles. While American industrial capacity was superior to that of other combatant nations, the emphasis on mass production meant that ammunition designated for sniper use often failed to meet the precision standards that effective long-range shooting demanded. American snipers reported point-of-impact variations exceeding 4 inches at 300 meters when using different lots of supposedly identical ammunition. The British .303 cartridges used in Lee Enfield sniper rifles presented additional consistency problems due to the rimmed case design and the variety of manufacturing sources supplying British forces. Ammunition produced in different factories, even when manufactured to identical specifications, would demonstrate different ballistic characteristics due to variations in manufacturing tolerances and quality control procedures. The shortage of precision ammunition forced snipers to adopt shooting techniques that compensated for ammunition inconsistencies rather than relying on the uniform ballistic performance that precision shooting required. German snipers learned to fire multiple shots at the same target when ammunition supplies permitted, using the first shot to gauge the ballistic performance of their current ammunition lot and adjusting subsequent shots based on observed impact points. This adaptation to inconsistent ammunition created tactical vulnerabilities that experienced enemy forces could exploit. The multiple shots required to achieve reliable hits increased the sniper's exposure time in any given position and provided additional opportunities for enemy observers to detect muzzle flash, sound signatures, or other indicators that could reveal the sniper's location. Replacement parts for precision rifles and optical equipment represented another critical supply chain failure that left many snipers operating with degraded equipment for extended periods. The specialized nature of sniper rifles meant that replacement parts were manufactured in limited quantities and given low priority in supply distribution systems designed to support mass-produced infantry weapons. German ZF-42 scopes, despite their advanced design, were particularly vulnerable to supply chain disruptions that left damaged optics irreparable in field conditions. The precision ground lenses, calibrated adjustment mechanisms, and specialized mounting hardware required for these scopes were manufactured by a limited number of suppliers who were increasingly disrupted by Allied bombing campaigns as the war progressed. A German sniper whose ZF-42 scope suffered internal fogging, cracked lenses, or damaged adjustment mechanisms would typically wait weeks or months for replacement parts that might never arrive. The specialized tools required for scope repair were rarely available at forward positions, and the technical expertise necessary for optical repairs was concentrated in rear area facilities that were often inaccessible to frontline units. Soviet PU scopes presented similar supply challenges, with the added complication that Soviet industrial production prioritized new equipment over replacement parts. The Soviet supply system was designed around the concept of equipment replacement rather than repair, but the specialized nature of sniper scopes meant that replacement optics were often unavailable when needed. Soviet snipers operating with damaged scopes learned to perform field-expedient repairs using improvised materials and techniques that rarely restored full optical performance. A scope with internal fogging might be partially disassembled and dried using body heat or small fires, but these field repairs often introduced dust, moisture, or mechanical damage that further degraded optical performance. The mounting systems used to attach scopes to rifles were particularly vulnerable to damage and difficult to repair in field conditions. The Soviet side mount system for PU scopes relied on precise machining tolerances that could be disrupted by impact damage, temperature extremes, or normal wear. A sniper whose scope mount became loose or damaged would find his rifle's accuracy severely compromised, but replacement mounts were rarely available through normal supply channels. American snipers using M1903A4 rifles faced similar challenges with their Weaver 330C scopes and mounting systems. The scope mounts were manufactured to precise tolerances that could be disrupted by combat damage, but replacement parts were often unavailable at forward positions. American snipers learned to perform field repairs using improvised shims, modified screws, and other expedients that rarely restored the precision fit that accurate shooting required. British snipers with their number 32 telescopes encountered supply problems that were compounded by the variety of mounting systems used on different rifle variants. The parts interchangeability that simplified supply for standard infantry weapons was largely absent in sniper equipment, where each scope and mount combination required specific replacement parts that were often unavailable through normal supply channels. The specialized clothing and equipment required for effective camouflage and environmental protection represented another area where supply systems failed to meet sniper requirements. Standard military uniforms and equipment were designed for general infantry use and rarely provided the specialized camouflage characteristics or environmental protection that sniper operations demanded. German snipers received some of the war's most advanced camouflage clothing, including reversible winter-summer smocks and specialized camouflage patterns, but these items were produced in limited quantities and rarely reached all personnel who required them. The famous German splinter camouflage pattern was effective in European woodland environments, but completely inappropriate for desert, urban, or winter conditions. The shortage of appropriate camouflage clothing forced German snipers to create improvised camouflage using whatever materials were available in their operational areas. Standard field gray uniforms would be modified with attached vegetation, mud, or other natural materials, but these improvised solutions were often bulky, restrictive, and less effective than purpose-designed camouflage clothing. Soviet snipers faced even more severe shortages of specialized clothing and equipment. The Soviet supply system prioritized basic military necessities over specialized equipment, leaving snipers to operate in standard uniforms that provided minimal camouflage effectiveness. Soviet snipers learned to create ghillie suits and camouflage clothing using burlap, canvas, and natural materials, but these improvised solutions required constant maintenance and replacement. The harsh winter conditions on the Eastern Front created particular challenges for Soviet snipers who lacked appropriate winter camouflage clothing. Standard Soviet winter uniforms provided warmth but were highly visible against snow-covered terrain. White camouflage overgarments were theoretically available but rarely reached front-line sniper units in adequate quantities. American snipers in the Pacific Theater faced unique clothing and equipment challenges that standard supply systems were unprepared to address. The tropical environment required specialized clothing that could provide camouflage effectiveness while remaining functional in high humidity and extreme heat. Standard American uniforms were designed for temperate climates and proved inadequate for extended operations in jungle environments. The lack of appropriate tropical camouflage forced American snipers to improvise using local materials and modified standard uniforms. Jungle environments provided abundant natural camouflage materials, but the rapid decomposition of organic matter in tropical conditions meant that improvised camouflage required constant replacement and maintenance. British snipers operating in various theaters encountered supply problems that were complicated by the diversity of environments where British forces operated. Equipment appropriate for European conditions was completely inadequate for desert operations in North Africa, while desert camouflage was useless in European woodland environments. The maintenance and cleaning of precision equipment in field conditions without proper tools, solvents, or facilities created ongoing challenges that significantly affected operational effectiveness. Precision rifles and optical equipment required regular maintenance to maintain accuracy and reliability, but the specialized tools and materials necessary for proper maintenance were rarely available at forward positions. German snipers learned to maintain their Karabiner 98K rifles using improvised cleaning materials when proper gun oil and cleaning solvents were unavailable. Motor oil, cooking oil, or other lubricants would be substituted for proper rifle oil, but these improvised solutions often attracted dirt and debris that could cause mechanical problems or accuracy degradation. The precision barrel bore of sniper rifles required careful cleaning to maintain accuracy, but proper cleaning rods, patches, and solvents were often unavailable in forward positions. German snipers would improvise cleaning rods using tent stakes, wire, or other available materials, but these improvised tools could damage the precise rifling that accuracy depended upon. Soviet snipers faced similar maintenance challenges with their Mosin-Nagant rifles. The 7.6 Tomb bore required regular cleaning to prevent corrosion and fouling buildup, but cleaning supplies were often diverted to support crew-served weapons that were considered higher priority. Soviet snipers learned to manufacture cleaning patches from cloth scraps and create cleaning solvents using alcohol, gasoline, or other available liquids. The harsh environmental conditions on the Eastern Front accelerated equipment deterioration and increased maintenance requirements beyond what normal supply systems could support. Extreme cold caused lubricants to thicken and metal parts to become brittle, while rapid temperature changes created condensation that promoted rust and corrosion. American snipers in the Pacific faced unique maintenance challenges created by the corrosive effects of salt air and high humidity. Steel components would develop surface rust within hours of exposure to tropical marine environments, requiring constant attention to prevent serious corrosion damage. The cleaning materials designed for temperate climates were often inadequate for the aggressive corrosion that tropical conditions produced. The absence of proper cleaning facilities meant that detailed disassembly and cleaning of rifles and optics was often impossible in forward positions. Snipers would accumulate fouling, corrosion, and mechanical wear that could only be addressed during extended periods in rear areas, but operational demands often prevented the extended maintenance periods that precision equipment required. British snipers operating in desert conditions found that sand infiltration created maintenance problems that were nearly impossible to address with available cleaning supplies and tools. The fine desert sand would work its way into every mechanical tolerance, creating abrasive conditions that accelerated wear and could cause complete mechanical failure if not addressed promptly. The lack of proper storage facilities for precision equipment created additional maintenance challenges. Rifles and optics that should have been stored in controlled environments were instead exposed to temperature extremes, humidity variations, and physical damage that accelerated deterioration and reduced operational lifespan. The cumulative effect of these supply chain failures created a situation where even the most skilled and well-trained snipers found their effectiveness severely limited by equipment shortages and maintenance problems. The precision shooting that sniper operations required was simply impossible to achieve consistently with inconsistent ammunition, damaged equipment, and improvised maintenance procedures. These supply failures had tactical implications that extended beyond individual sniper effectiveness to affect entire unit operations. Snipers who couldn't rely on their equipment were forced to operate at reduced ranges, accept lower accuracy standards, or avoid engaging targets that required precision shooting. These limitations reduced the tactical value that sniper units could provide to their parent formations and forced commanders to modify their tactical plans to account for reduced sniper capabilities. The grim mathematics of sniper warfare revealed themselves most starkly in the casualty statistics that emerged from major campaigns across all theaters of World War II. German sniper units operating during the Battle of Stalingrad suffered casualty rates approaching 85% over the course of the 5-month siege, with experienced marksmen falling victim to increasingly sophisticated Soviet counter-sniper operations that systematically hunted down individual German snipers using coordinated teams of hunters armed with captured German optics and specialized detection equipment. The 24th Panzer Division's sniper detachment, which entered the Stalingrad battle with 47 trained marksmen in August 1942, had been reduced to just 7 effective snipers by the time of the German surrender in February 1943. The majority of these casualties resulted not from direct sniper versus sniper duels, but from artillery strikes directed at suspected sniper positions, coordinated infantry assaults on compromised locations, and the devastating effects of Soviet counter-battery fire that targeted any position from which German snipers had been observed operating. Soviet records from the Stalingrad campaign indicate that their sniper units suffered comparably severe losses, with the 62nd Army's sniper companies experiencing turnover rates exceeding 70% during the most intense periods of urban combat. The close-range nature of fighting in the ruined city created conditions where snipers were forced to operate at ranges under 200 meters, eliminating many of the tactical advantages that longer-range precision shooting normally provided, while exposing marksmen to direct assault by infantry units that could approach their positions under cover of the extensive rubble. The 13th Guards Rifle Division's sniper platoon, commanded by Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Chekhov, lost 23 of its 31 snipers during a 6-week period in October and November 1942. These casualties occurred despite the unit's extensive experience and sophisticated camouflage techniques, demonstrating that even the most skilled snipers could not overcome the fundamental vulnerability created by operating in fixed positions for extended periods while under constant observation by enemy forces equipped with advanced optical equipment. American sniper casualties in the Pacific Theater reflected the unique challenges of jungle warfare, where the dense vegetation that provided excellent concealment also created conditions that favored close-range combat and limited the effectiveness of long-range precision shooting. Marine sniper teams operating during the Guadalcanal campaign suffered casualty rates of approximately 60% over the 6-month battle, with most losses resulting from Japanese infiltration tactics that allowed enemy forces to approach sniper positions undetected through the thick jungle undergrowth. The 1st Marine Division's scout sniper platoons lost 34 trained marksmen during the Peleliu operation, representing nearly 75% of their authorized strength. These casualties occurred despite extensive pre-battle intelligence and careful position selection, as Japanese defenders employed sophisticated tunnel systems and concealed firing positions that allowed them to engage American snipers from unexpected directions. The coral limestone terrain of Peleliu provided natural cave systems that Japanese forces had extensively fortified, creating positions that were nearly impossible to detect until enemy fire revealed their locations. British sniper casualties during the Normandy campaign demonstrated the particular vulnerabilities that snipers faced when operating in heavily defended areas where enemy forces had prepared extensive counter-sniper measures. The 3rd Infantry Division's sniper sections suffered 43% casualties during the first month following D-Day, with German counter-sniper teams proving particularly effective at identifying and eliminating British marksmen who had revealed their positions through muzzle flash or scope glint. The bocage terrain of Normandy created tactical conditions that favored defenders while exposing attacking snipers to observation from multiple concealed positions. German snipers, operating from prepared positions with pre-ranged firing lanes, could engage British snipers who were forced to move through unfamiliar terrain while searching for suitable firing positions. The thick hedgerows that characterized the Norman countryside provided excellent concealment for defenders, but created natural choke points where advancing snipers could be ambushed by enemy forces who knew the terrain intimately. Counter-sniper operations evolved throughout the war into sophisticated hunting techniques that dramatically increased the casualty rates among experienced marksmen. German Scharfschützenabwehr units developed systematic approaches that combined technical detection methods with tactical procedures designed to force enemy snipers into compromising positions where they could be eliminated by coordinated fire from multiple positions. The German Sixth Army's counter-sniper operations during the Stalingrad siege employed teams of observers equipped with high-powered telescopes and range-finding equipment who would maintain continuous observation of suspected Soviet sniper positions. These teams used triangulation techniques to plot the precise locations of enemy marksmen, then coordinated artillery strikes or infantry assaults designed to eliminate specific individuals rather than simply suppressing general areas. German counter-sniper teams achieved remarkable success rates against Soviet marksmen, with some units claiming kill ratios exceeding 3:1 against enemy snipers. The 71st Infantry Division's specialized hunter teams eliminated 127 confirmed Soviet snipers during a 4-month period around Stalingrad, while suffering only 31 casualties among their own personnel. These results reflected the advantages that defensive operations provided, as German teams could operate from prepared positions with extensive intelligence about Soviet sniper locations and movement patterns. Soviet counter-sniper operations employed different techniques that emphasized patience and deception over technological solutions. Red Army sniper hunters would spend days studying suspected German positions, using dummy targets and coordinated movements to force enemy snipers to reveal their locations. Once a German sniper had been located, Soviet teams would coordinate simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, ensuring that escape routes were covered and that the target sniper would be eliminated even if the primary assault failed. The 64th Army's counter-sniper operations achieved significant success against German marksmen through the use of coordinated hunter-killer teams that combined skilled marksmen with experienced infantry scouts. These teams would establish observation posts overlooking suspected German sniper positions, then use coordinated fire and movement to eliminate enemy marksmen who had been identified through patient surveillance. American counter-sniper operations in the Pacific Theater adapted to the unique challenges of jungle warfare through the development of specialized techniques that emphasized mobility and coordination with supporting arms. Marine Corps sniper hunter teams would use coordinated artillery and mortar fire to force Japanese snipers to abandon their positions, then engage them during movement between concealed locations. The effectiveness of counter-sniper operations created a psychological climate where experienced snipers understood that their survival depended on constant movement and position changes that prevented enemy forces from establishing observation patterns. This constant relocation created physical and mental stress that accumulated over extended periods, contributing to the high casualty rates that sniper units experienced even when they weren't directly engaged by enemy forces. Artillery and mortar fire represented the single greatest threat to sniper survival, accounting for approximately 40% of sniper casualties across all theaters and armies. The fixed positions that effective sniper operations required made marksmen particularly vulnerable to indirect fire missions that could be directed with precision once enemy forces had identified sniper locations through observation or detection of muzzle signatures. German snipers operating on the Eastern Front faced constant threats from Soviet artillery units that had developed sophisticated techniques for engaging individual sniper positions with precision fire. Soviet forward observers would identify German sniper positions through careful observation, then direct concentrated artillery fire at specific buildings, terrain features, or other locations where German marksmen had been detected. The 13th Guards Artillery Regiment developed specialized procedures for engaging German sniper positions that involved firing precise concentrations of 76 mm 122 shells at suspected locations, followed by immediate infantry assaults designed to eliminate any survivors. These techniques proved devastatingly effective against German snipers who had become complacent about their concealment or who had remained in positions for extended periods. Soviet Katyusha rocket artillery proved particularly effective against German sniper positions in urban environments, where the multiple rocket impacts would collapse entire buildings and eliminate any snipers operating from upper floors or concealed positions. The psychological effect of rocket artillery was as significant as its physical impact, as German snipers learned to associate any detection of their positions with immediate and overwhelming indirect fire response. German artillery units developed similar techniques for engaging Soviet sniper positions, using forward observers equipped with advanced optics to identify enemy marksmen and direct precision fire at their locations. The 24th Panzer Division's artillery regiment claimed 89 confirmed kills against Soviet snipers during the Stalingrad campaign, using a combination of direct fire from self-propelled guns and indirect fire from towed artillery pieces. American artillery support for counter-sniper operations proved particularly effective in the Pacific Theater, where naval gunfire could be directed at suspected Japanese sniper positions with devastating accuracy. The USS Iowa's 16-inch guns were used to eliminate Japanese sniper positions on Iwo Jima that had proven resistant to conventional artillery, with single shells capable of destroying entire cave complexes where enemy marksmen had been operating. British artillery units developed sophisticated techniques for engaging German sniper positions during the Normandy campaign, using airburst shells and white phosphorus rounds to force enemy marksmen out of concealed positions where they could be engaged by infantry weapons. The Royal Artillery's 25-pounder guns proved particularly effective at engaging sniper positions in the Bocage terrain, where their high trajectory allowed them to reach targets that were protected from direct fire. The vulnerability of snipers during movement between positions created additional casualty factors that were often overlooked in tactical planning, but proved decisive in determining unit survival rates. The constant position changes that effective sniper operations required exposed marksmen to detection and engagement during periods when they were most vulnerable and least capable of defending themselves. German snipers moving between positions in urban environments faced particular dangers from Soviet forces that had established observation posts and patrol routes designed to intercept enemy movement. The rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad created natural corridors that German snipers were forced to traverse, but these same routes were under constant observation by Soviet forces equipped with captured German optics and night vision equipment. The 71st Infantry Division lost 23 snipers during movement between positions over a 2-week period in November 1942, with most casualties resulting from Soviet ambushes at predetermined locations where German movement patterns had been observed and predicted. These losses occurred despite extensive reconnaissance and the use of diversionary movements designed to conceal actual sniper relocations. Soviet snipers faced similar vulnerabilities when moving between positions, particularly during daylight hours when German observation posts could track their movement across open terrain. The flat steppes around Stalingrad provided minimal concealment for moving personnel, forcing Soviet snipers to time their movements carefully and use indirect routes that often exposed them to German patrols and observation posts. American snipers in the Pacific Theater encountered unique movement challenges created by Japanese defensive tactics that emphasized the use of concealed positions and coordinated ambushes. Marine snipers moving between positions on Guadalcanal faced constant threats from Japanese forces that had established extensive tunnel systems and concealed firing positions throughout the jungle terrain. The dense vegetation that provided excellent concealment for stationary snipers became a liability during movement, as the noise created by passage through thick undergrowth could alert enemy forces to sniper locations and movement patterns. Marine snipers learned to move during periods of increased ambient noise, such as during artillery bombardments or aircraft overflights, but these opportunities were limited and often coincided with periods when visibility was reduced. British snipers operating in the bocage terrain of Normandy faced movement challenges that were complicated by the geometric pattern of hedgerows and fields that created predictable routes between positions. German forces had established observation posts at key terrain features that allowed them to monitor British movement patterns and establish ambush positions at likely crossing points. The 3rd Infantry Division's sniper sections developed specialized movement techniques that involved coordinated diversions and multiple route options, but these procedures required extensive coordination and consumed significant time that reduced operational effectiveness. British snipers would often spend more time moving between positions than actually engaging targets, reducing their tactical value while increasing their exposure to enemy detection and engagement. Extraction procedures represented another critical vulnerability that contributed significantly to sniper casualty rates. The specialized nature of sniper operations often required marksmen to operate in isolated positions that were difficult to reach and even more difficult to evacuate when operations were compromised or when snipers were wounded and required medical evacuation. German extraction procedures for compromised sniper positions relied heavily on smoke screens and suppressive fire to cover withdrawing marksmen, but these techniques were often ineffective against Soviet forces that had surrounded sniper positions and established overlapping fields of fire. The 24th Panzer Division lost 17 snipers during failed extraction attempts over a 3-week period, with most casualties occurring during the final phases of withdrawal, when snipers were most exposed to enemy fire. Soviet extraction procedures emphasized the use of diversionary attacks and coordinated fire support to cover withdrawing snipers, but the limited availability of supporting arms often meant that snipers were forced to conduct their own extractions without adequate cover. The 62nd Army's sniper companies developed self-extraction techniques that relied on pre-planned routes and cached equipment, but these procedures required extensive preparation and were vulnerable to German interdiction. American extraction procedures in the Pacific Theater were complicated by the jungle terrain and Japanese defensive tactics that made conventional evacuation routes extremely dangerous. Marine sniper teams developed specialized extraction techniques that involved helicopter evacuation from small clearings, but these procedures were limited by aircraft availability and weather conditions that often prevented aerial operations. The casualty rates among sniper units created cascading effects that reduced overall unit effectiveness beyond the simple loss of individual marksmen. Experienced snipers represented significant training investments that required months or years to replace, and their loss eliminated institutional knowledge about enemy tactics, terrain characteristics, and operational procedures that could not be quickly transmitted to replacement personnel. German sniper units that had suffered heavy casualties were often reconstituted with hastily trained replacements who lacked the experience necessary to operate effectively against seasoned enemy forces. These replacement snipers suffered even higher casualty rates than the veterans they replaced, creating a cycle of losses that prevented units from maintaining operational effectiveness over extended periods. The psychological impact of high casualty rates affected the performance of surviving snipers and replacement personnel who understood that their chances of survival were statistically poor. This knowledge influenced tactical decision-making and risk assessment in ways that often reduced operational effectiveness while paradoxically failing to improve survival rates. The devastating casualty rates and operational sacrifices that defined sniper warfare in World War II were compounded by a complex web of institutional attitudes and bureaucratic obstacles that prevented many marksmen from receiving appropriate recognition for their contributions. The military establishments of all combatant nations struggled with fundamental questions about the legitimacy and honor of sniper warfare, creating an ambivalent atmosphere where exceptional battlefield performance was simultaneously valued for its tactical effectiveness and viewed with suspicion due to its departure from conventional concepts of honorable combat. The German Wehrmacht's initial reluctance to fully embrace sniper warfare reflected deeply ingrained cultural attitudes about military honor and fair combat that dated to the Prussian military traditions of the 19th century. Senior German officers, educated in military academies that emphasized direct confrontation and conventional tactics, viewed sniping as a necessary but distasteful deviation from proper military conduct. This institutional ambivalence meant that exceptional sniper achievements were often acknowledged in unit records, but rarely resulted in the same level of formal recognition that conventional combat actions received. Oberjefreiter Matthias Hetzenauer, who achieved 345 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front, received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross only after persistent advocacy from his regimental commanders, who had to overcome Wehrmacht bureaucracy that was reluctant to award high decorations for what some staff officers considered unsporting warfare. The documentation process for Hetzenauer's award required extensive verification procedures that were not applied to tank commanders or infantry leaders, whose achievements were considered more straightforward examples of military valor. The Wehrmacht's award system reflected this institutional ambivalence through the creation of specialized criteria for sniper decorations that required higher standards of proof than conventional combat awards. German snipers were required to provide detailed documentation of each claimed kill, including witness statements, tactical circumstances, and verification by unit commanders, while infantry soldiers could receive decorations based on unit citations and general combat performance without individual kill confirmations. Soviet attitudes towards sniper recognition were complicated by ideological considerations that emphasized collective achievement over individual heroism, creating bureaucratic obstacles that prevented many exceptional marksmen from receiving appropriate acknowledgement for their contributions. The Red Army's political officers viewed excessive focus on individual sniper achievements as potentially undermining the collective spirit that Soviet military doctrine considered essential for unit effectiveness. Vasily Zaitsev's elevation to legendary status represented a deliberate propaganda decision rather than routine military recognition, with Soviet authorities selecting him as a symbol of individual heroism that could inspire broader military performance. However, this selective elevation of certain snipers to propaganda prominence meant that equally accomplished marksmen who lacked political connections or propaganda value remained largely unrecognized despite comparable battlefield achievements. The Soviet system of awards and decorations included specific provisions for sniper achievements, but the implementation of these recognition programs was inconsistent and often influenced by factors unrelated to actual combat performance. Political reliability, unit affiliation, and propaganda value often determined which snipers received formal recognition, while others with superior combat records remained unacknowledged due to bureaucratic oversight or political considerations. American military attitudes towards sniper warfare reflected cultural ambivalence about the role of individual marksmen in modern warfare, with many senior officers viewing sniping as an auxiliary capability rather than a legitimate military specialty deserving of institutional recognition. The U.S. military's emphasis on technological solutions and overwhelming firepower created an institutional environment where precision shooting was valued for its tactical utility, but not considered worthy of the same recognition accorded to conventional combat leadership. Marine Corps sniper Chuck Mahoney, who achieved 103 confirmed kills in Vietnam, received minimal official recognition during his service period, reflecting institutional attitudes that had been established during World War II and persisted into subsequent conflicts. The Marine Corps recognition system emphasized unit achievements and leadership performance over individual marksmanship, creating barriers to appropriate recognition for exceptional sniper contributions. The American military's award system included provisions for recognizing exceptional marksmanship, but the implementation of these recognition programs was hampered by bureaucratic procedures that required extensive documentation and verification processes that were often impractical in combat environments. American snipers frequently operated in small teams or individually, making the witness verification required for high-level decorations difficult to obtain. British military traditions, while more accepting of individual marksmanship achievements due to the country's sporting heritage, still reflected institutional ambivalence about the role of snipers in modern warfare. The British Army's recognition system acknowledged exceptional shooting performance, but often categorized sniper achievements as specialized skills rather than conventional military valor, creating subtle distinctions that affected the level of recognition that marksmen received. The classification of sniper operations under various security protocols created additional barriers to recognition that persisted long after the war's conclusion. Many sniper missions were conducted as part of special operations or intelligence gathering activities that required security classifications, preventing detailed documentation of individual achievements or public recognition of exceptional performance. German sniper operations conducted behind Soviet lines as part of Brandenburger Special Operations Units were classified under security protocols that prevented detailed record-keeping of individual achievements. These operations often involved extended missions lasting weeks or months, during which German snipers would eliminate high-value targets and gather intelligence while operating in Soviet-controlled territory. The sensitive nature of these operations meant that participating snipers could not receive public recognition for their achievements, and detailed records of their activities were often destroyed to prevent intelligence compromise if personnel were captured. The Brandenburger Regiment's sniper detachments conducted operations throughout the Eastern Front that remained classified for decades after the war's conclusion, preventing participating marksmen from receiving recognition for achievements that included the elimination of Soviet regimental and divisional commanders, the disruption of supply operations, and the gathering of intelligence that influenced major tactical decisions. These operations required exceptional skill and courage, but remained hidden from official recognition due to their classified nature. Soviet sniper operations conducted by NKVD special units and partisan forces were similarly classified under security protocols that prevented detailed documentation of individual achievements. These operations often involved the elimination of German collaborators, the assassination of enemy officials in occupied territories, and intelligence gathering missions that required extended periods of operation behind enemy lines. The NKVD's special sniper units conducted operations throughout occupied Europe that remained classified until the collapse of the Soviet Union, preventing participating marksmen from receiving appropriate recognition for achievements that included the elimination of high-ranking German officials, the disruption of occupation administration, and the support of resistance operations. These classified missions often required greater skill and involved higher risks than conventional sniper operations, but received no public acknowledgement due to their sensitive nature. American sniper operations conducted as part of Office of Strategic Services missions were classified under security protocols that prevented detailed documentation of individual achievements for decades after the war's conclusion. These operations often involved the elimination of specific targets, intelligence gathering, and support for resistance operations in occupied territories. OSS sniper teams conducted operations throughout occupied Europe and the Pacific that remained classified until the 1970s, preventing participating marksmen from receiving recognition for achievements that included the elimination of key enemy personnel, the disruption of occupation operations, and the support of indigenous resistance forces. The sensitive nature of these operations required security classifications that prevented public recognition of exceptional individual performance. British Special Operations Executive Sniper Operations were similarly classified under security protocols that prevented detailed documentation of individual achievements. These operations often involved extended missions in occupied territories where British marksmen would eliminate specific targets while supporting resistance operations and gathering intelligence. SOE sniper operations throughout occupied Europe remained classified for decades after the war's conclusion, preventing participating marksmen from receiving appropriate recognition for achievements that often exceeded those of conventional snipers in terms of both skill requirements and operational risks. The sensitive nature of these operations required security classifications that prevented public acknowledgement of exceptional individual performance. The limited availability of post-war psychological support created additional recognition challenges for sniper veterans who suffered from combat trauma but were unable to access appropriate treatment or acknowledgement of their service-related injuries. The intimate nature of sniper warfare created psychological wounds that were often more severe than those experienced by conventional combat veterans, but the limited understanding of combat trauma during the 1940s and 1950s meant that appropriate treatment was rarely available. German sniper veterans returning from the Eastern Front often suffered from severe psychological trauma related to their combat experiences, but the collapse of German military medical systems meant that appropriate treatment was unavailable. Many German snipers experienced persistent nightmares, intrusive memories of specific kills observed through their scopes, and difficulty adjusting to civilian life, but these symptoms were often dismissed as normal readjustment difficulties rather than recognized as service-connected disabilities requiring treatment. The social stigma associated with Germany's defeat and the association of sniping with assassination created additional barriers to recognition and support for German marksmen. Many German sniper veterans found that their wartime service was viewed negatively by post-war society, preventing them from discussing their experiences or seeking support for combat-related psychological problems. Soviet sniper veterans faced different but equally significant challenges in obtaining recognition and support for combat-related psychological problems. The Soviet system's emphasis on collective achievement and its reluctance to acknowledge individual psychological weakness meant that combat trauma was often viewed as a sign of political unreliability rather than a legitimate medical condition requiring treatment. Many Soviet snipers experienced severe psychological trauma related to their combat experiences, but were unable to access appropriate treatment due to the stigma associated with psychological problems in Soviet society. The intimate nature of sniper warfare, combined with the extended periods of isolation that many Soviet marksmen experienced, created psychological wounds that persisted for decades after the war's conclusion. American sniper veterans encountered psychological support systems that were more advanced than those available to their European counterparts, but still inadequate for addressing the specific trauma associated with sniper warfare. The American military medical system recognized combat fatigue as a legitimate medical condition, but lacked understanding of the unique psychological challenges that snipers faced due to the intimate nature of their combat role. Many American snipers experienced persistent psychological problems related to their combat experiences, but found that available treatment programs were designed for conventional combat trauma rather than the specific challenges associated with deliberate, observed killing through magnified optics. The lack of specialized treatment meant that many American sniper veterans received inadequate care for psychological wounds that affected their ability to function in civilian society. British sniper veterans encountered similar challenges in obtaining appropriate psychological support, despite the British military medical system's relatively advanced understanding of combat trauma. The British system recognized battle fatigue as a legitimate medical condition, but lacked specialized treatment programs for the unique psychological challenges that snipers faced. The incomplete documentation of sniper contributions in official war records created lasting recognition problems that prevented many exceptional achievements from receiving appropriate acknowledgement. The specialized nature of sniper operations, combined with the security classifications that often surrounded their activities, meant that detailed records of individual achievements were frequently incomplete or unavailable for post-war recognition efforts. German military records of sniper achievements were often incomplete due to the chaotic conditions during the final years of the war and the deliberate destruction of sensitive documents to prevent their capture by advancing Allied forces. Many exceptional German sniper achievements were documented only in unit war diaries that were subsequently lost or destroyed, preventing post-war efforts to recognize outstanding individual performance. The Wehrmacht's system of maintaining detailed sniper records was disrupted by the constant movement of units, the loss of administrative personnel, and the priority given to operational activities over record keeping during the final years of the war. Many German snipers who achieved exceptional results found that their achievements were inadequately documented, preventing appropriate recognition even within their own units. Soviet record-keeping of sniper achievements was complicated by the Red Army's emphasis on collective rather than individual performance, resulting in documentation systems that often failed to capture the full extent of individual contributions. Many Soviet snipers achieved exceptional results that were attributed to their units rather than documented as individual achievements, preventing appropriate personal recognition. The Soviet system's political considerations also influenced record keeping, with some sniper achievements receiving extensive documentation due to their propaganda value, while others were minimally recorded despite comparable or superior performance. This selective documentation created lasting distortions in the historical record that prevented many exceptional Soviet marksmen from receiving appropriate recognition. American documentation of sniper achievements was hampered by the decentralized nature of sniper operations and the lack of standardized record-keeping procedures across different units and theaters. Many American snipers achieved exceptional results that were inadequately documented due to the absence of systematic recording procedures and the priority given to conventional unit activities over specialized operations. The American military's emphasis on unit, rather than individual achievements, meant that many sniper contributions were documented as part of broader unit activities, rather than recorded as individual accomplishments. This approach prevented many American marksmen from receiving appropriate recognition for achievements that were tactically significant but not captured in official records. British documentation of sniper achievements was more systematic than that of other armies, but still suffered from gaps and inconsistencies that prevented complete recognition of individual contributions. The British system maintained detailed records of sniper training and equipment, but often failed to capture the full extent of operational achievements due to the security classifications that surrounded many sniper activities. The tactical innovations developed by snipers during World War II received limited recognition in post-war military doctrine development, despite their significant contributions to the evolution of modern warfare. Many techniques pioneered by wartime snipers became standard procedures in subsequent conflicts, but were not attributed to their original developers, preventing appropriate recognition of their innovative contributions. German snipers developed advanced camouflage techniques, stalking procedures, and counter-sniper tactics that influenced post-war military doctrine throughout NATO forces, but these innovations were often attributed to institutional development rather than recognized as the contributions of individual marksmen. The systematic approach that German snipers developed for urban warfare became standard doctrine for subsequent conflicts, but received minimal recognition as the achievement of specific individuals or units. Soviet snipers pioneered techniques for operating in extreme weather conditions, developed innovative approaches to target selection and engagement, and created training methods that influenced sniper doctrine throughout the Warsaw Pact nations. However, the Soviet system's emphasis on collective achievement meant that these innovations were attributed to institutional development rather than recognized as individual contributions. American and British snipers developed techniques for jungle warfare, desert operations, and integration with conventional forces that became standard procedures in post-war conflicts. These innovations represented significant contributions to military effectiveness, but were often incorporated into official doctrine without recognition of their origins in the individual creativity and experience of wartime marksmen. The legacy of World War II snipers extends far beyond their immediate battlefield contributions to encompass lasting influences on military doctrine, training methods, and equipment development that continue to shape modern warfare. However, the recognition of these contributions has been hampered by institutional attitudes, security classifications, and documentation problems that have prevented many exceptional achievements from receiving appropriate acknowledgement. The psychological toll of sniper warfare, combined with the limited availability of appropriate support and recognition, created lasting challenges for veterans who sacrificed their mental health in service of their nation's military objectives. Many of these warriors carried psychological wounds that persisted throughout their lives, receiving minimal recognition or support for injuries that were as real and debilitating as physical battle wounds. The institutional ambivalence towards sniper warfare that characterized military establishments during World War II reflected broader cultural attitudes about the nature of honorable combat and the role of individual achievement in modern warfare. These attitudes created barriers to recognition that persisted long after the war's conclusion, preventing many exceptional marksmen from receiving appropriate acknowledgement for contributions that were tactically significant and strategically valuable. The story of World War II snipers remains incomplete due to the classification of operations, the destruction of records, and the institutional barriers that prevented comprehensive documentation of their achievements. Many of these forgotten warriors made exceptional sacrifices and achieved remarkable results under conditions that tested the limits of human endurance, yet their contributions remain largely unrecognized by the societies they served. As the last survivors of this generation pass away, the opportunity to fully document and recognize their contributions diminishes with each passing year. The legacy of these forgotten warriors serves as a reminder of the human cost of warfare and the